Usually we always talk about the winning team first, but I think we'll make an exception here and throw it to Kansas City, who has been eliminated from playoff contention. I think facing a serious offseason where they got to ask some tough questions, a real look in the mirror offseason coming for Kansas City and just how they build this team, especially on offense. And to top it all off, on one of the final few plays of the game here, Patrick Mahomes tears his ACL. He is obviously out for the rest of this season, out for the rest of our fantasy football playoffs here, and just the rest of this regular season, because they're not going to the postseason. And they're exploring surgical options was the latest report. Don't know what that means, but Chris, just a multi-level gut punch type of day for the Kansas City Chiefs. And obviously we talk about this as a big injury Sunday. It doesn't get much bigger than Patrick Mahomes tearing his ACL and ending his season.
Yeah, and this seemed like the type of game where I think we were talking earlier today on FF Live of, can the Chiefs try and pull out all of the stops in order for them to at least have a shot at getting into the postseason. And if you just look across the box scores, it seemed like that was going to be the case. Travis Kelce coming in for 9 targets, Rashee Rice, 11 targets. So the pass volume was going to be there, I think, just because Kansas City was trying to get into the postseason. But of course, even there, some of the production throughout that game, you could see it's just so limiting in terms of how little they were able to do after the catch. Even still, I mean, so that's where, even if they were going to pull off this win, their road to going deep into January, or even the shot at getting into the Super Bowl, was something of a long shot. So now they have such a tough road ahead of them. I mean, whether or not Travis Kelce winds up hanging up, what they're going to do with this backfield, even watching Kareem Hunt, Isaiah Pacheco splitting the carries, neither of them getting more than 2.5 yards per carry. I mean, there's so much about this offense outside of the passing game that really needs to get just restructured, hopefully for 2026 and beyond. That, yeah, I'm with you. There's going to be a lot of tough questions that the Chiefs are going to have to answer. And on top of that, it's just, when is Patrick Mahomes going to be ready for the 2026 season? And hopefully that's going to be the case, and hopefully we'll hear a bit more about his status for 2026. But yeah, tons of questions right now for Kansas City moving into the offseason.
Man, so brutal. And obviously I think those big picture questions are something we can talk about over the course of the next month here as the season winds down, because I agree with you. It's a lot of complicated questions here. It's not one fix. People will do this, right? They'll come and be like, well, we just got to get rid of Matt Nagy and then that'll fix everything. That's not going to fix everything. In the past, it's been, well, we just got to fix, and the Chiefs themselves have done this. We just got to fix the offensive line and everything else will be fine. That certainly didn't happen this year, even though they really tried to invest into that front five. Tons of injuries on that unit to the point where it's kind of a skeleton crew, like a ghost of what it should have been. But regardless, even when the unit was healthy, it wasn't completely what it needed. They ignored the running back room. I think they've just doubled and tripled down on the same type of wide receivers. Again, we'll have all of these conversations as the next month goes on into the offseason for Kansas City. It's brutal that this team is not going to be in the postseason, and now they face the next few games here without Mahomes. Gardner Minshew is the backup quarterback, in case you forgot, out there for the Kansas City Chiefs. He came in and completed 3 of 5 passes and threw an interception. I mean, I don't know what you want him to do in that situation, but I mean, what's your level of confidence on guys like Travis Kelce, on guys like Rashee Rice, who both caught 7 passes in this game? Do you think those players can, I mean, I guess we'll call them, do you think they can be PPR scams in the next couple of games of the fantasy season with Gardner Minshew at the helm?
I think that's possible. It's just, what else is going to be there for the rest of the teams? Because let's assume that, not to say that we're going to be starting Juju Smith-Schuster or Hollywood Brown, who was out for this matchup, but we'll see if he comes back for week 16. But even if the rest of the going for the rest of the way, it's just, what is the rest of the production for that team? Are they even going to be able to move into the opposite team's red zone? Or what is that play calling going to look like once they do that? So it's just such a gut punch for the entire Chiefs organization as a whole. It just kind of calls into question, what is this team going to look like now in kind of this shell-shocked mode without having Mahomes under center, really no hope for the postseason. So yeah, from a volume standpoint, yeah, I'll still have Rice and potentially Kelce, depending on what your other options are. Those would be the only 2 guys I'd really trust in my lineup. But with Minshew tossing the ball, it's just the quality of targets. And of course, how often the Chiefs wind up getting into scoring position. That's going to be the real question for me moving forward.
Oh man, it's so crazy. What a kind of tough thing to figure out here. And the next game that they have is against the Titans, right? Like theoretically, we'd be thinking, okay, well, they're not going to make the playoffs, but at least they can take their anger out on this, pitiful Titans team. I'm not sure how excited I can get about that. I'm not going to say the Chiefs are on upset watch with Gardner Minshew next week in Tennessee against the Titans, but
yeah,
it just feels very deflating for Kansas City right now. So you wonder what the vibe will be around that team as Minshew starts for them next week. Let's talk about the team that won this game. I suppose by math, they did win this game. Justin Herbert. It doesn't really feel like they won this game. Chargers again score 16 points. Chris, Justin Herbert hasn't cleared 6.0 adjusted net yards per attempt for 6 straight games. He was hit 10 times in this game, which is somehow more than he was hit on Monday Night Football against the Eagles when it felt like he was getting blasted left and right. I mean, this Chargers team, it's tough to watch right now, especially on offense. Everything feels really hard. And, we went from being like, man, how are they going to get the ball to all of these wide receivers at the beginning of the season to they can't get the ball to anybody on this team right now.
No, and just even when he does complete passes, it's just the weird stuff that happens afterward. Keenan Allen tries some random lateral at some point during this game, which was, I don't even know what the decision play. I know that could not have been a play call. There was no design to that. So I didn't understand what was going on there. And just I could understand walking into this game, especially with Quentin Johnson being out, a few deep shots of Trey Harris. So those were nice to see, but it's just, even those felt difficult to watch at times. It's just the start, stop, or stuttering portions to this passing game that just makes it somewhat hard to trust on a week in, week out basis. Because I would say, even like we were talking this morning, Ladd McConkey probably popped up as the only Chargers pass game option that we would trust going into this. But even for him, 3 targets in this game, it's kind of falling behind some of those other options, like whether it's just Oronde Gadsden popping up for 5 targets, or like we talked about Trey Harris, even Keandre Lambert-Smith falling into the end zone with a touchdown. It's just this rotation of receivers without anybody truly sticking out from a pass volume standpoint. Again, is just what makes it all the more tough to analyze what is this Chargers offense at this point in the season. Whereas, kind of to your point, through the first month of the season, it was really the only things that we had to worry about was, is it going to be Quentin Johnston, Keenan Allen, or Ladd McConkey? Those are the only 3 things that we had to worry about. Was just, all right, well, how's that target distribution really going to shake out? But now at the back end of the season, I don't think anybody really can trust or wants to roster any of those guys.
Now, it's a great point, and it just all comes back to the fact that they cannot pass protect. They don't really have a plan to adjust for this offensive line right now. I've been really skeptical of what Greg Roman is putting out there from just a design perspective. It's difficult, right? When you're this banged up on the offensive line, you lose 2 what should have been star tackles. It's always going to be tough to adjust to that. But shoot, that happened a long time ago, man. Like I said, it's 6 straight games that Justin Herbert has been under 6.0 adjusted net yards per attempt, which accounts for sacks and everything like that. So it's just a real struggle for this offense. And yet they play the Dallas Cowboys pass defense next week. So I don't know. Maybe we'll be talking about a potential bounce back, but I can't imagine they're going to be able to protect Justin Herbert with Quinnen Williams and the boys getting after him. So, I think if we were still doing, coping corner, Ladd McConkey is a coping corner candidate. Justin Herbert is a coping corner candidate. I've got 2 Justin Herbert teams that may advance past this round of the fantasy football playoffs somehow. And if they do, I'm going to be looking at what do I do with Herbert next week as a potential quarterback start in that Cowboys matchup. Real quick note on the backfield split here. Amarian Hampton, 52% of the touches. Kamani Vidal, 42%. Vidal was definitely more involved as the passing down back. He ran way more routes. He played more snaps. What's your thought process on Amarian Hampton as a fantasy starter right now, Chris?
It'd be more of if I could see if the Chargers can build a lead or if they can get into some sort of positive game script, which to your point, looking at their upcoming matchups, especially for week 16, that's a little bit harder to envision. But if it's going to be that type of script, I can see that. But for where they're at right now, and especially because of the pass protection issues, that becomes harder for me to trust a guy like Hampton, where we've seen the utility for Kamani Vidal in that pass game. And for his receiving usage, I would say that Vidal, and also the way that the team is structured right now, Vidal probably shapes up as the better of those 2, because you were just saying they played Dallas next week and then the Texans in week 17. So between those two guys, I think I would probably lean towards Vidal because I don't see how the Chargers are going to be able to move the ball on the ground, at least because of the two defenses they're going to be facing over these next couple of weeks.
Yo, we need a not safe for work tag for that week 17 Texans defense going against this Chargers offensive line.
Yeah.
Like that, we need to blur some of that out. Okay. There needs to be a parental advisory warning on that particular game. Not going to be a pretty watch for this offense in that one. Again, usually we start with the winning team, but if we gave this treatment to the Chiefs, I think we got to give it to the Packers here, because if the Chiefs lost, potentially arguably one of the best quarterbacks, if not the best quarterback in the NFL, and Patrick Mahomes, the Packers fear to believe that they have lost one of the best defensive players in the NFL here. Micah Parsons, again, believed to have suffered a torn ACL against the Broncos, according to Ian Rappaport of the NFL Network. That is the fear right now. Does need to get an MRI to confirm that. It was a non-contact injury for the Packers, which is a bummer. The other bummer is that this is not even the only injury news for the Packers in this one. Christian Watson, who had been playing the best football of his career, comes down hard on, I think it was his left shoulder, right? I don't know. One of the shoulders, potentially. I think it was the left. It comes down, looked like he got on his left shoulder there for a pass to Patrick Surtain, ultimately intercepted. He was ruled out with a chest injury and later left the stadium in an ambulance, according to James Palmer. Tackle Zach Tom also got injured here. Like, these are three of the best players on the Packers roster. All three of them suffer serious injuries here. So, Chris, just brutal day for the Packers. Not only do you lose this one, but you lose a guy in Micah Parsons, who is a transformative talent, and a guy in Christian Watson, who had been playing some excellent football in their wide receiver room.
Right. And we talked about this at least over the past couple of weeks as we've seen Watson ascend into that wide receiver one role, that he essentially fits the style that Jordan Love likes to play, right? He runs those deep crossers and also just those go routes and those verticals down the field that for a guy like Jordan Love that wants to hit those throws off of his back foot, huck it down the field for 15 to 20 air yards a pop, Watson really did fit into how like Love is trying to play at this point in his career. So seeing him lose that on top of already, the Tucker Kraft injury from almost like a month and a half ago. This is now a team that now has to reconfigure or try and reassert itself or try and figure out what its new offensive identity is going to be, because beforehand it was explosives to Tucker Kraft, maybe take a couple of shots to Romeo Doubs and figure out like what's going to happen afterwards. Well, then you lose Tucker Kraft. Watson comes back into the picture. All right, we can still do some of the same things we were trying to do, but now like on top of that, we actually have some of these other ancillary pieces to it. Jaden Reed comes back, and like you mentioned earlier, he comes away from this game limping as well. So it's just they didn't have to rely on Luke Musgrave to fill in for Tucker Kraft. You didn't really have to see too much from these other pass catchers, whether it's Dontavian Wicks popping up for a couple of games here and there. But now you have to reconfigure this entire offense at this point in the season where we thought they were essentially going to waltz into the postseason. So I'm somewhat concerned about what this is going to look like, especially now that we're in the back end of the fantasy season and of course the regular season for the Packers. So yeah, a lot of concerns and a lot of, I would say, questions that we're going to have to answer about Jordan Love and the rest of this offense for at least the next couple of weeks or so.
Packers still have a 93% chance to make the playoffs, according to the Athletics playoff simulator, but only a 51% chance to win the division. Of course, they play the Bears next week, and that will go a long way to deciding who ultimately wins the NFC North. On the Broncos side of this, huge hats off to Bo Nix. He balled out in this game, and look, Bo has been very up and down this year, and that has just been obvious to anyone watching this with objective eyes that there's been some good, but there's been some bad for Bo Nix here. He diced up the Packers zone coverage. And this wasn't like, Micah Parsons went out on the first drive. Micah Parsons went out late in this game. So Bo Nix was doing it even with the best defensive player on the Packers roster on the other side of the field. According to Next Gen Stats, Bo Nix faced zone coverage on 89% of his dropbacks. Third consecutive game he's faced zone at above 89%. And he completed 20 of 30 passes for 267 yards, the second most of his career against zone coverage, and all 4 of his touchdowns. This has been a struggle for Bo. He doesn't always, it's like not always within the rhythm. It's not always within the timing. He really struggles against zone coverage, or has at times this year. It's mostly been, man coverage, just kind of point it to a spot and rip it to, Cortland Sutton or Troy Franklin on some of the speed slot stuff. But he really diagnosed and solved this defense here. Huge performance from Bo Nix in week 15.
Yeah, it's 0.57 EPA per dropback. That has to be a top 3 mark on his career. Definitely a top mark for him this entire season. And to your point, the struggles that he's had against zone defense was one of the reasons why I thought this was going to be more of a down game, if not for him, than any of the pass catchers that we would want to at least trust to start, whether it's Cortland Sutton after he popped up for 10 targets last week, or even Troy Franklin that, again, has had at least forced that conversation of whether he's the wide receiver 1A, 1B, somewhere in there during the middle parts of the year. I want to stay from this entire passing game, but seeing that development from him, at least in this game alone, where, yeah, under pressure on over 30% of his dropbacks, and seeing how well he was able to adjust to that pressure and hit like either 7 or 8 different pass catchers in this game. I mean, yeah, hats off to him, Sean Payton for the play calling, and of course the rest of his pass catchers for being able to execute on this in this game. So yeah, I'm very encouraged for where we're seeing Bo Nix, at least from a development standpoint. And I've heard a lot of folks say it across the league where progression or development isn't linear. Sometimes it takes time for quarterbacks in order to figure out how best to approach each situation. And it seems like, at least for this game, something was able to click for Nix and how well he was able to play against these Packers defense.
Other note on the Broncos here, R.J. Harvey, who had 19 carries for 65 yards and a touchdown in this tough matchup. No big explosive runs here, long run of 8 yards, but he was the only running back that got the ball here. Jaleel McLaughlin had 2 carries. That was it. It was the R.J. Harvey show. He has a rib injury, so something to monitor there. Don't have an update on that, but that obviously will be worth tracking as he goes into these next couple of difficult matchups here on his schedule. But again, good for him to get out of this game with a solid performance if you started him in fantasy football.